Hi, and welcome to the Debrief. This is your weekly catch-up on everything happening in North Carolina public policy and politics. I'm Donna King. I'm editor-in-chief of Carolina Journal. Make sure you head over to our website, carolinajournal.com, for the latest on everything happening in Raleigh now that we are gaveling in. Joining us on the couches today, we have Mitch Kokai from the John Locke Foundation, bringing his depth of knowledge and historic perspective on everything. I'm always go to Mitch for everything we need. And then, of course, from Carolina Journal, we have our opinion editor, David Larson. And on the other couch, we have Jeff Moore, the deputy editor of Carolina Journal, and Brianna Kramer, who is our legislative reporter, going to be covering everything happening down at the North Carolina General Assembly. Brianna, let's start with you first. Gaveling in, they're ready to go.
Yeah, state legislators are ready for action in the long session this year. It officially started on Wednesday. They swore in 170 state legislators who were elected in the November election, and so they're off and running now. They were sworn in with their families down in Raleigh at the General Assembly, and so they've now officially begun. They won't come back now for 3 weeks, actually, until January 29th, but they are officially sworn in, and so they're going to get underway in just a few weeks here for the long session, which is the start of the biennium, which means that this year their main focus is the state budget, and that's really the big priority they're going to be focused on in the months ahead.
Sure. Now, Berger, longest serving state Senate leader in the country at this point, but we've got a new speaker. Tell me what their priorities are.
Yes, that's right. So Phil Berger is going to still lead the Senate as he's been doing for many years, and then Representative Destin Hall is the new Speaker of the House. So he's replacing Tim Moore, who's now up in D.C. in Congress, and so he's going to be leading the House with not the supermajority that they had last year. So he's going to have to step up and try to negotiate a little bit more and hopefully make some progress with the governor's office as well on some of their priorities. The number one priority that they listed yesterday is aid for Western North Carolina. So that remains the number one thing that they're focused on in the months ahead is working with the federal government and then, of course, state government and all the aid that they can get to help in the recovery process. So that's going to be the big thing that they've been focused on since about October, and that they've funded about $1 billion now at the state level, but they'll continue to do that. And then there's some other initiatives that they would like to continue pushing. For example, tax relief, that's one thing that they've been pushing for a long time. The economic outlook for North Carolina is pretty strong, and the jobs and economy here have really transformed since around 2011. And so that is something that they have said they're going to continue to push for, is more tax relief and more focus on the economy.
Sure. Mitch, I'm going to come to you, actually. Tell me, we're hearing what Destin Hall and Berger are talking about. Is this a continuation of what they've been working on, or are you seeing some maybe new priorities that might be emerging?
Well, certainly Helene relief is a new priority that cropped up right after the storm. And so it's not entirely new because we've already had 3 different bills approved that dealt in some respects with Helene and the response to it. So it's not terribly surprising that's going to continue to drive the train. And as Brianna mentioned, the budget is the big thing in the long session, and Helene's going to have so much of an impact on that. They'll all be tied together. Some people may wonder, why do they come into town, have the votes, and then they go home for 3 weeks? That actually is a change that started once Republicans took over the General Assembly. What used to happen when the Democrats were in charge was they would come in at the beginning of the session in late January. They would vote for the new leaders, and then nothing would happen for several weeks as the committee assignments were made, as people would actually physically move from one office to another. And so basically they were getting paid to be in Raleigh, but weren't doing much of anything for several weeks. Republicans, once they took over, decided, that isn't the best use of our time. Why don't we come in, have the meeting, have the initial meeting where everyone's sworn in, you vote for the speaker and the president pro tempore, and then once that's done, then you go back home, you do all the committee assignments, people can move their offices, and then when you come back, and people start paying for you to be in Raleigh again,
Right.
you'll actually be doing the people's business.
Sure, sure. You know, that actually speaks to more of the legislative reform thing that we've been talking about at the Locke Foundation and Carolina Journal. There's some changes maybe that might be on the horizon policy-wise. Do you feel like we might see some changes in the way the legislature works? Because they spend a lot of time in session for a part-time legislature.
There could be some changes, although a lot of that will probably depend on the legislators themselves and
Yeah.
whether they are interested in doing that. I'm sure the rank and file legislators, especially the ones who have jobs,
Sure.
want that to happen. They would like to see, oh yes, we actually will be done in the early part of the summer, and we can go back
Right.
for the rest of the year and not have to worry about this mess. It'll be interesting to see whether Destin Hall is the new speaker, Phil Berger, the other top leaders will go along with that and say, let's
Right.
get away from this thing of being here throughout the entire year and actually get the business done as soon as we can.
Sure, sure. And continuing the march to tax cuts. We've got a drop now here in 2025. Do you see it more coming?
Yeah, the thing is the state law is already spelling out additional tax cuts. The corporate tax rate is already on its way to zero, so they're probably not going to do anything
Just
more
let
on that.
it keep going.
On the individual rate, basically the rate continues to go down. Now they might speed it up. That's a possibility because that's something that they have done when they've already had tax cuts in place. They've gone back and said, okay, well, let's speed this up. And then they put in the revenue triggers to
Okay.
make sure that they don't cut taxes when they don't have enough money coming
Right.
in. So that may be something that they consider. But another thing that the John Locke Foundation has been pushing for is to get rid of the franchise tax, which is
Right.
basically a tax on every company. If you're making money or not,
Sure.
you got to pay this franchise tax. And that's one thing that if they got rid of it, it would be another arrow in the quiver of North Carolina when they're looking for entrepreneurs and new businesses to come in. They'd say, all right, you don't have to pay this franchise tax anymore, which is something you would have to pay whether your company's making money or not.
Right.
It's something that has stood out to make a bad mark on what is otherwise a pretty good mark for
Sure.
North Carolina tax-wise.
Well, now we've talked about this actually within Carolina Journal. Franchise tax itself makes me think, oh, it's if you buy a franchise. That's not the case, right? It's on a tax on any investment you make in North Carolina.
Yeah, it's basically, I mean, you own a business,
Right.
and you have to pay the tax. And
Okay.
it has nothing to do with whether you made money or lost money during the course of the year. It's basically the equivalent of what used to be a poll tax for individuals.
Sure.
You were a person, you were taxed.
Right,
And so
right.
you're a business, you're taxed. That's
Sure.
the franchise tax.
So it's the cover charge or
Right,
entrance to
right, exactly.
really start a business here.
It is a fee to enter the business world in North
Okay.
Carolina.
Yeah, that seems like that would have some support to maybe be re-examined for sure. Let's talk about Helene. Big priority in the General Assembly, but also priority for the new governor, Governor Stein.
Yes, so it was an interesting move right off the bat. Stein
Sure.
decided, there's been some controversy at NCOR, the usual recovery and resilience office that they have under the executive branch. And instead of going with them for this, because there's been some funds that have been unaccounted for, and it wasn't always so smooth with Eastern North Carolina hurricane recovery. Stein decided to immediately create this WNC, Governor's Recovery Office for Western North Carolina.
Right.
And we're here in Wake County. They took the chairman of the county commission, Matt Calabria, I believe his name is,
For Wake, yeah.
for Wake County, and put him in charge of that. So that'll be a new office to overlook just the Helene recovery.
Right.
So that'll help streamline things. Will be less bureaucracy and maybe red tape to just have this one task for them.
Yeah.
So money from the federal government and from the state can go there, and so we'll see if that's.
Yeah.
I wasn't able to find much in Chairman Calabria's background that had to do with recovery, and he'd gone to Duke Law, been the editor of their law journal.
So
He's
no
been the county
background in-
commissioner.
in
I'm not going to say that.
emergency
I was
response.
reading on his background and his bio, and
All
he
right.
at least didn't put anything on his county commission bio. I was trying to read through his history
Sure.
and his career, and didn't see anything
Okay.
necessarily that directly connected to that, but maybe he's been able to oversee budget, Wake County,
Okay.
and they figure Stein thought that maybe he'd be able to
I mean,
overlook this as
Can't
well.
go worse than the last one,
He's
right?
not from Western, he's Wake County. He's
Yeah.
not Western North Carolina,
Okay.
and it doesn't necessarily have recovery background. So
Sure.
hopefully that was a good pick because it is something that everybody has their eyes
Oh,
on.
for sure. That is a high-profile role for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, very interesting. Speaking of, I guess, weather. First, let's talk a little bit about snow prep. It looks like we've got some snow preparations coming in for this weekend, right?
We've got potential snow coming here in the Raleigh area. Yeah, so the North Carolina Department of Transportation had a press conference on Wednesday, just to go over their plan of action for Division 5 is like the Raleigh-Durham area up to the Virginia border. And so they're currently salting the roads and getting preparations done ahead of time. They started salting or brining the roads Wednesday, and they're going to do that through Friday up until the snow hits, apparently. If that's
You're
really
from Minnesota?
Yeah, that's right.
So
that's my home state.
Is this comical to you? I mean, it's got to be a little bit.
Well, for like 2 inches, I mean, yeah.
2 inches.
Maybe
We're
2
making
inches.
a big deal of it, that's for sure. But if you're not used to it, especially drivers on the
and we get a
road,
lot of ice. As opposed to snow.
definitely. And that's what they said too. If it's freezing ice or freezing rain, I mean, that's that could be a problem, especially for drivers who aren't used to it.
Sure.
And the impact is, I mean, it's multiplied here because we don't deal with it on a regular basis. We don't have the same resources to really tackle a lot of the things. So we don't have as many plows as they may have.
Yeah, people like freelance. I see regular.
Yeah, they say they have
people's
contractors, like a few hundred contractors that are ready to go.
So it's an all hands on deck for just 1 or 2 inches.
Sure. What's it meaning for the inauguration? Everything's supposed to happen Saturday.
Yeah, so it looks like all of the festivities are canceled for the inauguration. I think they're may postpone some of those celebrations to March, I think.
Okay, they're going to do something in the spring.
But they're going to do something in the spring. So there's a lot of things that go into it all, but it's all for not now. So they're going to press the pause button, and that's going to happen while the weather comes in, which is a good thing, just a PR move, especially. You don't want to be having festive celebrations when there's like an ice storm and people have power outages and all sorts of stuff like that. So that, along with his office, the WNC plan to kind of make sure that the disaster funds are handled differently. Right out of the gate, Stein seems to be making moves that politically, like as far as the public is concerned, would be a little bit be well received and maybe better than. They're definitely not missteps, like coming out and saying, "Oh, we're going to do this differently because we don't want it to go."
That was the first day he was sworn in, so that is encouraging.
Yeah, so I think that him coming out with some of these actions right out of the gate may portend some a more general nature of more reasonable actions like that going down the line. So especially when we see him dealing with the General Assembly, what that may look like. So
I got you actually were the parade guy when I first met you, right? Working for McCrory. Tell me about the process of going through planning an inauguration and then everything goes away with 2 inches of snow.
Yeah. So I'm not a professional parade guy, but I do. I helped with the Republican campaigns in 12, and so the McCrory administration was incoming, had the transition team there. Joined there, walked into a meeting one day, willing to help however I could. I have a background in trading equities.
And they're like, you know what?
Political risk, and I got introduced to a full room of people as the project manager for the inaugural parade. So. Handled the parade. It went great, if I do say so myself.
It absolutely did go very well.
But what that showed me actually was in the inaugural and transition activities, there's a ton of activity that goes on during a big transition like this. Now, this isn't such a stark transition because you're going from a Democratic administration where they had relationships already. They're retaining some staff, some key staff members. But there's a lot that goes into it. So as they prep, and there's a celebratory nature to all of this thing. So you want to they're going to have a block party instead of a parade. But they want to have that party and celebrate Stein's campaign success here and kicking off his term. So they'll be sure to have that in March. And by that time, we may have snowstorms in March. Who knows? It's North Carolina. So, but yeah, there's a lot that goes into the fun part of it, but also on the policy side of it for what they're actually going to push in this upcoming legislative session. So the transition team's been working on things like parades or block parties, but also working on like what are tax policies that they may want to see or their legislative priorities. And so they're getting all their ducks in a row there to be able to have a full court press with the legislature too, to try and see if some of Governor Stein's priorities can get across the finish line.
Yeah, and having those individual agencies communicate well with legislators, that's going to be a big part of that. Yeah,
I believe so. And so Stein's experience going back in the NC Senate and his time as AG, he has relationships with Phil Berger, who's going to be probably the most powerful person in the legislature here, as he has been for a while now. So that may come to play here in these next couple of months.
Sure. Actually, while I've got you, let's talk about Buncombe County. There's just been so much upset about Buncombe County taxes. Have you been working on your taxes over the last week or so getting ready to see what 2024 looked like for you. People in Western North Carolina, 2024 is not a great year for them, and now their taxes are going to have to be on time, no waivers.
Yeah.
What's going on?
I think the deadline came, I think it was on the 6th or
Yeah.
whatever. So the Buncombe County property taxes, the state law, the county doesn't have any ability to actually delay or make exemptions or exceptions for the collection of these property taxes. So they had a public awareness announcement that people whose properties are minorly, severely damaged, or in some cases not even there at all,
Right.
the property taxes assessed on those properties are still due.
Wow.
And they don't have any wiggle room. But perhaps we had our senior VP for research of the John Locke Foundation suggest in a piece on CarolinaJournal.com that maybe this is an opportunity to react in a positive way, to carve out some policy exceptions for when you have emergency or exceptional situations like this, to where it's a really tough pill to swallow if you've lost your home and now you're getting a bill for the property taxes on it. Property taxes are a tough pill to swallow anyway.
Right.
But if you don't even have the property anymore or severely damaged and you're thinking how you're going to piece together your life again, to have to pay these taxes is just something else. So there's a big uproar about it. A lot of reaction online.
Sure. Do you think that there's some appetite for making that kind of change?
Perhaps, but this certainly raises the larger issue that Helene has all kinds of ripple effects, because not only does the state law say that you have to pay those property taxes, but that's how the county government is funded.
Right.
So if that money's not coming in, that means you're not paying your county manager or all of the county staff. And expand this out, this is also going to have an impact on the North Carolina budget, because North Carolina gets some of its money from those many counties out in the west that have been impacted by Helene. They're not going to be getting as much money because a lot of those folks didn't make as much money.
Right.
And certainly the storm hit right in the peak time for a lot of the businesses in those counties. So this is going to be having a long-term impact. It will really affect North Carolina this year, but probably will have impacts for several years to come.
Will they be able to take some action during this legislative session to provide some relief, even though the deadlines have passed?
It's possible that they could give some sort of retroactive relief. My guess is that's the type of thing that's being talked about for the Helene relief bill, whenever that is.
Sure. What are your thoughts on this?
I think they both covered it very
They
well.
covered it,
The points I had were very similar.
Yeah,
just
of
that
course.
would be a terrible thing to
Oh,
have
right.
your home swept away and then receive a tax bill.
get a bill for it.
And it doesn't look like there's an immediate remedy to that. And of course, the county needs that money to operate,
Sure.
and they probably have a lot more expenses after that storm, just fixing all of the buildings. that
Oh,
have
and the
been
county
damaged
employees
and the
need to be
yeah.
able to have an income. And
Yeah, so much goes into that, but I do think that the legislature has their eye on this, as does the U.S. Congress, and so WNC maybe will. I guess maybe their role would come downstream from the legislature, looking at that and maybe passing some kind of deferment that allows anybody that can show that there's in process some kind of assessment on a property that's been damaged.
Right.
That the legislature, I'm sure, will take a look at that, but I don't know. It might get into a lot of technicalities to fix it that I'm sure they'll have to work out.
Sure.
In Buncombe County, I'll just mention that they made sure to reiterate that they're going to get out there as soon as they can to reassess what properties were, so that the property value. So if you're getting a tax on the value and say it's $400,000 for the house and the land that you're there, and it's not there anymore, that they did say they're going to try to expedite the assessment so that they get as much accurate information. So if this isn't fixed retroactively, at least for the taxes you'll have for 2025, will more accurately reflect what you actually have on the ground there or don't have on the
But
ground.
even that could be a major chore, because some of the roads in the most damaged areas, there might not even be good roads
They
to
can't
go
even get
up
over
and
there.
assess it. So
Yeah.
it's going to be a kind of a mess to work out, I'm sure.
Right. Are you hearing a lot of these kind of things down there?
Yeah, I think they're going to continue all of their focus really on Hurricane Helene recovery. So I think they're hearing about this week. This was a big thing online talking about how these people are struggling and yet they have to still pay for these property taxes that they no longer have. And so I think now that it's kind of spread around, legislators are going to be addressing that because they want to help relieve the people of Western North Carolina as
What's
best
the
they can.
schedule? coming back? Are they here the rest of the week? What's going on next
Yeah,
week?
so they're gone right now. They were just in on Wednesday,
Okay.
and then they'll come back in 3 weeks on January 29th. And that's really when things are going to kick off.
Okay.
And when they'll really get down to
Take
business.
a deep breath, ready to
Yeah,
go.
yeah,
Oh
we've got
my
a few
gosh.
weeks.
Maybe 4th of July. We hear it never happens.
Well, actually, it's interesting because they Dustin Hall mentioned that
Right.
he hopes that this year they don't have to spend as much time or
Okay.
as much of a time commitment. He did mention that yesterday in his speech. So
all do.
yeah, they all do.
they all do. All right.
see.
Before we wrap up, let's talk about what's the latest on the Supreme Court race.
Okay, we'll try to make it as quick
Yeah,
as
sure.
possible, but you might remember this is the one major race that's still unresolved in
Okay.
North Carolina. Democratic incumbent Allison Riggs leads Republican Jefferson Griffin by 734 votes, but Griffin is still challenging about 60,000 different ballots in the race, and what he's been trying to do lately is ensure that the State Board of Elections doesn't get to certify the election result until he has his challenges resolved by a court in some sort of final resolution.
Sure.
So he filed a complaint with the state Supreme Court on December 18th. The following day, the State Board of Elections moved that case out of the state Supreme Court to federal court. And earlier this week, the federal judge overseeing this case said, I shouldn't be looking at this. This should go back to state court. So he sent it back to state court. And then the state Supreme Court the next day, Tuesday, put a stay on the election and said, okay, we'll hear this case. They voted 4-2 to do that. And they set out a briefing schedule that will have some sort of resolution on the state Supreme Court side, perhaps late January. But then, the day after the state Supreme Court acted, the State Board of Elections filed an appeal with the 4th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals asking that court to come back in and tell the federal judge, Richard Myers, take the case back from the state Supreme Court and deal with it. So the 4th Circuit has not yet ruled on that issue, but we're still waiting to see if they're going to do anything. If they act, it could go back to Judge Myers, who would have to decide this. If not, if the 4th Circuit just says, no, this is back in the state Supreme Court, let that happen, then we could see some sort of resolution as early as January 24th, but likely a little bit after that. And then Justice Allison Riggs, who is the incumbent and is the apparent winner of this election, she has said in her latest court filing that she hopes the whole thing could get resolved before February 11th, because that's when the state Supreme Court comes back and hears cases again.
Wow. Yeah, let me know what you think.
Yeah, I was interested to see, when the state Supreme Court ruled that the Board of Elections shouldn't certify that race, that there was one of the Republican justices, Justice Dietz, he joined Earls in saying,
It's unusual. I mean, it seems like it would be unusual.
But his reasoning, so he saw, there's 60,000 votes out. He said a lot of them, he didn't think it was meritorious that, maybe somebody didn't have a Social Security number on or a driver's license number, but he did say the foreign voters, people who had never lived in North Carolina and never planned to live in North Carolina, about 5,700 voters. He did say that looked meritorious. He also said, that shouldn't overturn it because the rules were in place and all that. But I did think it was interesting that there did seem to be merit in his eyes to that these voters, shouldn't have had their vote counted if they're not from North Carolina and they didn't have voter ID. And the Board of Elections had decided that that didn't matter for them as much as it did for residents of North Carolina, even though they're overseas. So that would be interesting if ultimately it would come down to those 5,700 because it's only down to 700 or so votes between the two. And so that would be interesting to watch.
So never lived in North Carolina. Never planned to, and no idea.
The two classes that Dietz saw merit in were, one of them were the never lived in North Carolina. These are basically the children of North Carolina residents who are overseas, who they've never set foot in North Carolina, but state law has allowed them to vote as North Carolina residents. And that really only covers about 260 people. There aren't a whole lot, but then there are about 5,500 who are the ones who were overseas voters who voted with no photo ID. And in both of those cases, Richard Dietz said, even though I'm dissenting and I don't think that this should be addressed because this election's already happened and those were the rules that were in place and you can't change them afterward, he said, in both of those cases, I agree this is unconstitutional and they shouldn't happen. You shouldn't be allowing someone who's never lived in North Carolina to vote here, and you should apply photo ID to these overseas voters who would be among the people you would be most suspect that they are who they say they are.
Do you anticipate that we could look at some tweaking of the voter ID laws and some of these things that we've just made changes to in the last session? Would you see more coming because of this?
Well, it's entirely possible, but I think in this case it's more of the State Board of Elections applying the law as the General Assembly wanted it to be applied. Remember, we're going to have a constitutional amendment on the ballot to affect the voter ID, to ensure that voter ID is not for just people who show up in person, but that it also is for people who vote absentee, which is what the state law already says. It's just the Constitution doesn't say.
Well, that's about all the time we have for the debrief this week. Make sure you check out carolinajournal.com for all the news and analysis you need to get through the next legislative session. We're going to bring it back to you this time next Thursday, but in the meantime, please like and subscribe. Make sure you share these videos because we're going to have it each week as we move through the next legislative session. Thanks for joining us.